So we're live.
Well, I'm listening to this music. This music is new.
This is a little bit more mellow than the music that um, Maggie usually makes fun of me for putting on here. So I thought this was a nice little jam.
So we have all kinds of new stuff. We have new a new YouTube page, a new YouTube channel, which are we connected to right now? I don't even know.
Yes, we are. We're
Okay.
connected to almost everything that we own.
Okay. Well, I'm so excited because this is starting to come together. Our beginners, what is this, like podcast for beginners?
That's right. It's podcast. I won't say it because if I say old ladies, you're going to get mad at me.
That's right. You and I are going to go round and round over that, Tunchi, because I'm a little bit older than you and I'm not old.
We're old souls, honey.
Well,
We're young in our bodies, but old in our souls.
oh, I kind of feel like it's opposite. I kind of feel like it's a little bit of opposite. So, well, I feel like it's been a month since last Wednesday.
It does feel that way. I did end up with COVID. When we were talking last week, you were like, "You need to take a COVID test." And looking back at that video, I did look very ill.
You
I
were
was.
not feeling well. You
Mm-mm.
and you weren't going anywhere anyway, but I'm glad you did finally test with your free, probably free government issued COVID
That's
test
correct.
that you have there. That's really important.
Yeah, yeah. It was. I just when we got off that live, I went to bed and I was like, I feel like everything is being drained out of me right now.
Like it took absolutely all of your energy to get through. And I was trying to carry you, but it's not easy because you kept chiming in. I was trying to save your voice. It sounded like it was hurting for you to talk.
it it was like the footprints in the sand I saw where you picked me up and carried me, and there
Yes.
was only one set of
Yes.
footprints.
Yes, that's exactly what. Well, we're talking about my stomping grounds, my prison stomping grounds tonight, and yours for a short time, but most of my prison experience happened on the Dr. Lane Murray unit in Gatesville, Texas. That's it.
There it is. There it is. Um, I
Murray.
won't. I won't highlight your usual comment about your stars. I'll let that one go.
I appreciate that.
But yeah, I thought that we would, try to highlight each unit and have a good discussion. A lot of times people who have loved ones on the inside, they want to know what it's like at each unit, and then it's nice to just compare and hear how different one experience literally up the road can be so different than where you're at. It's really bizarre. And I thought, what better place to start than your alma mater, the Dr. Lane Murray unit.
That's it. That's it. So, that's the road that the drive. That's the driveway we're looking at. So, yeah.
Now, I made a little slideshow that we can. It was hard to find pictures, so I tried to find the best pictures that I could. Um, Ghostface Gangster. Hi, I love the
Hi.
tag. I love the name. Um, I'd get into a whole discussion about Scream and stuff, but yeah. So I put together some pictures, and I thought that we could just kind of go slide by slide and hear maybe some thoughts or memories that you have um, looking at these photographs. So, how do you feel? And I have to be mindful that we do have our Podbean podcast, so there will be people that can't see the pictures eventually if they're listening to the podcast in a different way. But like you said, this is the entrance. You can see the unit in the background, and there's the big cement block sign that says Dr. Lane Murray Unit, Texas Department of Criminal Justice. What do you feel when you see that,
Do you,
Marcy?
you know that sign, that concrete rectangle emerging from the ground? It that's a thing that there's a lot of ladies that I've been incarcerated with that go back actually and get their picture taken in front of that sign. That's a whole thing. And so when I see that, that's what I think. Now, Brittany and I, my girlfriend and I, went back to the unit. She was visiting her friend, and I was not anywhere near bold enough to get out of my vehicle and walk over in front of that sign to get. I did not want to give any officer any reason to say anything to me. But there's lots of people that do. So I don't have any anxiety looking at this picture. And it perhaps it's because I have driven back onto that property since I've been out.
It kind of reminds me of a tombstone, like it's really what it looks like. To me, I always found it, at least the older units kind of they're smaller and they're different colors or whatever. But this is the angle of it and everything it just reminds me of I still, like you said, I did a short amount of time at Lane Murray when I was 18, pretty close to around the time they opened the unit. Some of the buildings weren't even there, like the chapel and stuff, but just seeing it, the outside of it makes me feel like I'm 17, 18 years old. And the horror of being on the host squad at Lane Murray at that age. Yeah. So let me switch over here and tell me if I hear the dogs.
Sorry.
It's okay. I'm going to switch over and tell me if you can see the next slide. There it is. So here is the aerial view of Lane Murray. And I'm going to try to use can you see my pointer on the screen?
I can.
Okay. So this was the area that you came in. Right. Where the cars are. And then that's
the staff parking lot, visitor parking lot. Yeah. And then you go in.
So what is this little building right here?
Do you know? I don't.
That's the guard shack right when you get to the gate?
I don't. Oh, it must be. No, because that would be further down. I don't know what that little building is. I don't even remember seeing that. Shush. Oh my gosh.
Your dogs always, they feel very left out when we start talking. And I hear that snapping. I feel like I'm in church with my mom. Okay, are you back?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
okay. All right. So all right, so this main building here this is where visitation is?
Yes, that's admin, warden's offices. I want to make sure I'm looking at it. Yeah, and visitation is all right there. So and it's air conditioned in that building.
Right. So here we see the mini air conditioning units on the roof there. And then there's the gate where you enter into Main Street. So anybody that's actually watching, you see this long sidewalk. It's a very wide sidewalk that stretches the whole unit. So when you hear Marcy say on Main Street, it's like Main Street in a downtown somewhere. This is Congress. This is Congress
Right.
Avenue. That's where all the stuff happens. So this is where you're actually entering. Everything is surrounded by that fence, but that perimeter fence. But this is where you cross over into this gate. And so this building right here, this square building, which one is that?
So what it is if you're not seeing the aerial view, it's literally Jennifer described a sidewalk, but it's wider than your average residential street. And where inmates walk is all the way to either side of that. But we call it Main Street, and it's as wide as a street. And then there's buildings placed on either side of those. So the buildings on one side of Main Street are all living quarters. That side, that's right, Jennifer. So that's all living quarters. But on the other side, it starts with an education building that stands alone. And that education building has air conditioning.
Mm-hmm.
So the classrooms in there are pretty typical of what you would think any traditional classroom would look like, with the exception of there are prison guards walking around. And of course, that's not too different than high schools nowadays, and even middle schools, right? They have school police officers that are dedicated to walking around that area. So,
And your library's in here too. I think this almost whole section down here would have been y'all's library.
yes.
Library. I'm sorry. Lori will make fun of me for saying library.
Yes, library.
Uh-huh. So what is the little building here?
That
the
the
left.
next building on that same side of the main street is the gym. So the a building that rarely gets used. It gets used for
Right.
lockdowns. It gets used for shakedowns. The staffing, ideally, if everything was working according to policy and the way that it's all supposed to work, fully staffed, the gym would be open they would have aerobics classes. There's a couple televisions in there and a bunch of workout videos in there. There is some exercise equipment. There are some basketball goals that I think in a better ran facility, you might have actual basketball games. There's a volleyball net that they can set up. In the 10 years that I was there, none of that ever happened. I think that they had open call gym time less than 10 times in 10 years.
Jeez.
So,
Now, Marcy, I want to talk about the gyms in women's prisons because you're highlighting something that happened at every single freaking unit I was at. Every single unit. You would have a really nice gym, right? Like the gym at Mountain View. I mean, we did pressure them a lot more to use it. Like we even put a mural on the wall. We had a long time ago, they used to have what were called coaches. There was somebody that was a staff member that was a coach, like a PE coach that ran the gym, and then they got rid of them in the late 90s. But we had an officer that, like, I think he was one of the ACA compliance people, right? But he made sure that we had to have activities. You had to show that you were doing activities at the unit. So we had volleyball tournaments, we had conferences in there. So he was responsible for that. Now, until he came along and did that, that gym was never used. The gym at Riverside, full of dead crickets. And they absolutely hated inclement weather because our rec yard at Mountain View was literally, you just walk across the street, and I mean, like sidewalk, there's the gym. And they hated us. They would have us in inclement weather 1 degree away and be like, oh well, stay out here. And I never understood what their resistance was for us to actually utilize the gym.
I love that Mountain View unit, which is a hop, skip, and a jump away from the unit we're talking about, would even offer inclement weather ever, because that's something. So TDCJ policy says that we're supposed to have outside recreation X amount of times offered to us a day. And then policy goes on to say when it's inclement weather. When the weather does not allow for inmates to recreate outside, they are allowed to have gym time as recreation. That doesn't happen on Lane Murray. Maybe, I mean, I can say 3 times, and that might be a stretch. I remember them calling that over a decade. So,
Well,
yeah, that's not happening.
looking at the buildings on this layout, the gym is the smallest building there other than the strip shack in the
Right.
back gate, which should also be bigger. But you've got how many people are housed at Lane Murray?
Almost 1,300, so
1,300 for that little bitty gym. And y'all had the craft shop in there. So how often were y'all able to use the craft shop? Never?
well, now the craft shop was out of all of those women at any given time between 4 and 8 women that got to be participating in that program. It was very strict. They wanted people that had lengthy sentences. They wanted people that had absolutely zero disciplinary cases, which on this unit in particular was a big challenge. That wasn't something that was easy to accomplish because you could get in trouble for anything. You could
Right.
get in trouble for accidentally leaving a piece of trash in your cubicle that you didn't realize was even there. So, yeah, that definitely happened. So, um, yeah, the craft shop, and I don't have any experience with the craft shop. So,
An interesting side note for the folks listening is that the craft shops at the women's units, again, way back in the 90s and 80s, we had incel, what they call piddling craft, that you could do crocheting and all this other stuff, and you could sell it to officers. You could send it home. Well, they got rid of it, or they very like tightly controlled it, like Marcy's saying. So that was a source of income, like, because you could literally sell that to the staff members. And the men, they still have very robust craft shops where they do leather work, all kinds of stuff. And so when we talk about higher education and women not being able to afford their college classes, they always point to the men and say, well, the men afford these classes. Well, first of all, their support is different. And second of all, they have craft shops that they sell leather work. You'll see a lot of the legislators will brag about their boots and their belts and their bags that they bought from people incarcerated. So just wanted to highlight that for another topic, for another
yeah,
discussion.
yeah, in that same little building, along with the gym and the craft shop, that's where the beauty shop is
Oh
also.
my God. So you've got all three of Wow. That's a
Right.
super tiny space for over 1,000 women to try to utilize that during inclement
Well, it
weather.
was never open either, so it didn't
God
really matter what
bless.
size it was. We cut our hair
Oh,
with, we had to cut our hair and each other's hair with, blades out of razors, or like my length of hair, long hair, I would use toenail clippers to keep my hair cut. I never once was able to get a haircut my entire time I was there.
boy, I feel like when we have our night where we go through Mountain View pictures, you're you're gonna
I'm gonna
talk a
be
lot of
mad.
shit. You're gonna get mad.
I'm gonna be mad.
Um, so let's move on to this big building. What
So
is
it's the biggest building just about, I think, on the layout that we're looking at, and that has it has several different things in it. It has, from right to left, it has the laundry is right there, and then the chow hall is in the middle, and then it has medical. It's all in that one building.
Yeah, and the pill line window is like right over here in the far
Right.
left? Okay.
Right. Right at the end of that building is where the pill line is connected to medical,
Yeah, and
not
those
air
are
conditioned. It's
right.
real funny. Medical, that part of that building is air conditioned, but the chow hall and laundry, where the hottest equipment is used, is not air conditioned.
Yeah. Tell us about because one of the worst experiences at Lane Murray for me, obviously, other than the host squad, was the chow hall and the food. So give us an idea of what was the chow hall like in terms of the food and the things that happened in the chow hall?
So, the way that the unit runs chow is they're going to have a ranking officer outside the chow hall, and they're going to call shots of chow by dorm. So they'll say, give me 30 from chow from K1 Alpha. And then when everybody who's turned out from K1 has gone to chow, they're going to call the next dorm. So first of all, you don't know when you're going to eat, because chow that runs about 2.5 to 3 hours. So you don't know, are you going to eat at 11 or are you going to eat at 1? You know what I mean? So that's a little bit challenging. But then you line up and you walk in the line in the chow hall. You have to stay in that line. You are not, I've gotten a case for waving at my friend on the other side of the chow hall, not talking, not jumping up and down, waving my hands, not disruptive, not secretly communicating, signing to her, but literally I've gotten a disciplinary case for seeing my friend who I've known for years and we didn't live together anymore, and waving at her from across the way. So as soon as you get in there, the officers they hate that duty post. So even the officers that are more relaxed and not so rude are a little bit rude in those duty posts. It's just, especially in the summer, if it's 110 outside in that chow hall, I promise it's 140. It's ridiculous, ridiculously hot. People will, in the summer, they'll wet their shirt, and then put a wet shirt on to go to the chow hall. Anyways, you go through the line and you have to start eating at the minute that you step out of the line. You have to start eating off of your tray as you're walking to your chair. And you have to sit in the same order. So you walk through the line and then you sit, just filling the tables up in the same order. So, and you're stuffing your face. There's no time to talk, or there's no time to say this is good. There's no time to look around to see anything, or to even hardly breathe, honestly. So yeah, that's how that is. It's not a pleasant experience. A lot of people that I was incarcerated with intentionally avoided going to the chow hall. It's somewhere that you can get in trouble very easily for nothing. So if you're trying to stay out of trouble, I mean, when I made parole, Jennifer, I never went back to the chow hall, not once.
Mm. Well, I remember, not just when I was younger having to go in the chow hall, but also we went to a week-long peer education conference. All the units came to Lane Murray to have that training, and we had to eat lunch. And it was just horrific. And people that were with me that had never left Mountain View before were in tears, because that is how drastically different the experience was in terms of the food, the staff, the environment, the heat. So it's crazy to have just such a radically different experience, literally not even a mile away from each other.
We had anytime volunteers came in for any religious services or anything like that, that's something that they would go through the chow hall and eat. And the kitchen bosses would know volunteers were eating that day, and we would all on the unit, we'd get excited. We're like, oh, volunteers are here. We're going to eat better than we normally would, because they would step up their game. And so I remember about my 7th or 8th year in, sitting in the chow hall, and it was the kind of situations where the volunteers were coming in and sitting right with us even, because sometimes they eat in ODR, right? But they're eating on our side, and we're thinking, hey, this is pretty good. And those ladies were shocked at the quality, the low quality of that
Mhm.
food. And I was just, it was embarrassing it was embarrassing to me that I was enjoying that meal thinking, hey, this is really good. But that just kind of gives you like a baseline of what I had grown accustomed to
Right.
and what they were expecting. So,
Right. So I know that we have the chats that you and I can see from YouTube, and I don't know why we can't see the Facebook chats, but I'm kind of monitoring that. And Chris says, most chow hall meals sucked anyway, but the food always got better when visitors or legislators or any type of visitor to the unit. It got better so much, so much better. And I remember us when we ate there. I remember spitting out rocks. I remember there was a little sliver of glass and twigs and literally dirt in our food at Lane Murray, and not just from the time I was a teenager to the time we went to the training. Um, that never changed. Never changed.
rocks was normal.
Uh-huh.
Rocks, especially in the beans, that was normal. You learned not to take a bite and
Right.
first. You learned
Right.
to you learned to make sure and roll that around in your mouth for a moment
Before
before
you
you
bit
broke
down on
the
it.
tooth.
You,
And
you
there
know,
were people that chipped their teeth on
mhm.
rocks. That was not that uncommon.
And what you said about, like, you have to start eating. So you have 20 minutes by policy. You have 20 minutes in the chow hall, and that starts from the moment you get in the door. And you're like, well, logically, that doesn't make sense if it takes you 20 minutes to be. They don't care. Start eating it as soon as you are on. You better just start eating it, like you said. And
Jennifer,
go ahead.
it never was 20 minutes though. It never
Right.
was even it
Right.
I don't remember any one time that it was 10 minutes, and I had my little commissary purchased watch, and
It's just
you
check it
know,
out.
and I remember checking it out and being like, wow, I literally went through that in 4.5 minutes. And that was not unusual. It
What?
wasn't unusual for me I used to make kind of a game out of being in the dorm and timing the ladies from the time they left the dorm to come back. And oftentimes it was 7 minutes.
Jeez.
And that's leaving the dorm, going through the chow hall line,
And getting back.
eating, and coming back.
Well, when I was 18 years old and I was on the host squad, I was starving and I didn't have commissary. I didn't have any, I didn't have any commissary funds, and those were some hard years, but I was hungry. I was starving. I was young. I was working in the fields. And sometimes I would cry at night in my sleep because I was so hungry. And I didn't ask people for food. I knew better than that, right? I I just knew that I had to eat whatever was in the chow hall. And when you are not able, when you literally can't eat your food and you're told to get out, like, you are shoving that while you're putting
Yes.
your tray in the slot, you were shoving food in your mouth. And I remember just being like a starved animal when I was at that age, because I was working in the fields. I was young.
Yes, that's anybody that um you okay, so that's one thing. If you In my experience, so I went to the store. So if I'm going to chow and I'm sitting with people that don't go to store and I'm watching them kind of shovel their food in, I'm handing them some of my food because they are hungry. It's not enough. It's not enough food to keep you from being hungry.
Right. It's not enough to begin with, and then you don't have any time to eat what you do have. Um,
Right. It's the same thing about being on restriction. Anytime I was ever on commissary restriction and my box had finally depleted of my commissary items, it was that same feeling. It's a little bit of a desperate feeling. You need those calorie intakes, especially if you're working a manual labor job like host squad.
mhm. So let's talk about medical. So this is a respite area, meaning it is an area with air conditioning that you could hopefully beg and plead to go cool down in. But I really want to talk about what was your experience of medical care at Lane Murray, if any? Did you
Well,
avoid that place as well?
no, oh gosh. My first pap smear in prison on the Dr. Lane Murray unit. Now, Jennifer, I'm a mother of 5. I've had 5 babies, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all delivered naturally, all vaginal deliveries. So I'm going to my I'm at the pap smear. I'm there. I'm getting my pap smear, and people had warned me that they had warned me, and I said, "Well, I'm getting one because I have a 20-year sentence, and I want to make sure I'm okay. I'm
Mhm.
30 years old, and I'm getting my pap smear, you know." And anyways, the nurse practitioner, and he might have been a physician's assistant. I don't remember which one he was, but he was in the middle of the exam, like the tools are opened me up, and he's in there, and he looks at me and he says, "Well, I can tell that you haven't had any children."
What the fuck?
And my eyes kind of got big, I'm sure. And I said, "Sir?" And he said, "Well, they you aren't able to. Your uterus is inverted, and I can tell that you've never been able to have children." And I said, "Well, I have 5." You know, and he said, "Oh, C-sections? No. No, I have 5." You know, 5 that I delivered. And so that was my first taste of the medical department at the Dr. Lane Murray unit.
Jeez. Well, and that really encapsulates the inadequacies of unit medical right there. Like, I think anybody who has done time in TDCJ hearing that story, they're going to be like, I believe that. I believe that completely and 100%. Um, I had a PA, a physician's assistant, who was giving me a pap smear, and in the middle of it, Marcy, in the middle of it, stopped and picked up his piece of cake from the ODR
What?
and began to eat it while he was staring at my vagina.
What?
He was like, "The cake is good in the chow hall today." And I'm like, I feel so awkward. And
Yes.
that was a light story. Like, I have real horrific stories about pap smears and pelvic exams for myself and other women. We had to get one of the PAs walked off the unit. There was an investigation. Like, you say pap smear, and every woman in TDCJ is like, damn, like you said, I don't want to go do it. I hear the horror stories, but I need to take care of my health. At least the lab reports I can go look at myself, even if the man doesn't, he can't see that I've had 5 kids. Lab work doesn't lie. But the process of going through that, and painful. Like, I knew women that had had children and intercourse with men that were like, that is the most painful pap smear. I remember my first one, I cried. Like, I was laying there crying. Um, they don't give a damn. They don't give a damn.
No,
So,
there's no bedside manner for the most part. I will say years later I got a spider bite on my knee, and it got pretty ugly. Um and they were I don't know if they were just intrigued with my injury or my ailment, but I had to go several times to get it like redressed and that kind of stuff. But I got good care then. Uh, but that's the only time. I don't know. And I'm not saying, these are people with their degrees and with their education. And I'm not saying they don't know what they're doing. I just think that a lot of times, even they just adapt to their environment. They adapt to their workplace. They hear how the officers are treating us. There's an officer in medical treating us that way.
Right.
And I think that that happens a lot. They kind of lose their compassion for why they even got into that field. Um,
Yeah, no, I
so
agree with you. People that may, that are a lot of times they're working in the prison system because they've had some type of probation or some type of trouble somewhere else. But like you said, it's kind of a desensitizing that starts to happen within that culture, definitely. So I want to move on here to this big building. What is this big building?
So I'll say that the last building on the right-hand side down Main Street, well, almost the last building, right? You have to go through a locked gate to get into that building. It's there's a like it's closed. You have to stand there and wait. Now, there is a keypad thing that has a button on it, but they get furious, enraged if you push
Right.
that button.
Right.
So, what they want to happen is for them to be sitting in the control room and see you on camera and know to open that gate, but that's not all the time it works. So, anyways, that nobody tells you you're not supposed to push the button. So I also got yelled at, horrifically yelled at
Yes.
for hitting that button when I first got there to ironically get into the privileged dorm or the honor pod or whatever other kind of terminology people use for incarcerated individuals that maybe are low risk because they have low disciplinary history. So that's where I was when I first got to the unit. I lived there like 3 different times.
So I remember when F dorm, it's still called F dorm, right?
It is.
Okay. Okay. So I lived in, I think, FC, but it had its own little gym. And then they
It
converted it to the dog program where the ladies stayed there.
That's right. It does have I will say their rec yard is the best rec yard on
Right.
the unit. It's the biggest rec yard and almost the only rec yard that you can play volleyball without constantly, I mean, the razor wire eats volleyballs. So
Mhm.
all the other rec yards are small enough that you're only going to play for a few minutes before one of the balls ends up in the razor wire. So yeah, that's the biggest rec yard. And in there is a gym. Now I got there in 2010 and that had already been converted to the Patriot Paws program, which is the program where inmates train dogs for veterans.
Mhm. So this little building to the left of F dorm, what is that?
So the last building on the unit is the chapel.
Mhm.
That's the church house. That's where all the volunteers come in to indoctrinate. It's just we're in the Bible Belt, so it's very, 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 very Christian. There are other services available, and one of the other bigger services where you actually do have a volunteer come in is they have a Muslim program, but all religious services are based out of that building.
I remember we used to have our peer education conferences here, either here or in the gym, but mostly in the chapel. It's one of the newer buildings, relatively speaking, and it looks very different inside. And I'll show everybody a picture in just a second. But where is the hospice? Not the hospice, but the medical unit that they built within Murray. Where would it be? Because this is an older map.
No, it's not a new building. So
No, it's not?
no, they converted, I don't know if it's 1 or 2 of the dorms in F dorm.
Oh, so it's in F dorm.
Yes, and they've air conditioned 2 of those dorms. So
Okay.
none of the inmate housing is air conditioned, except now they do have, um, they're trying to, I don't know that they've actually moved hospice patients in. I don't know the status of that, but I do know that the construction has happened, the air conditioning has happened. And what they're doing is, because those dorms are 2-floor, they're going to have like regular general population inmates on the second floor, because that's not, obviously not a viable place for a hospice patient getting up and down the stairs. And then hospital or hospice patients on underneath. And I don't
Well,
know the logistics of that, but I do speak to enough people on that unit that I'm aware of that's what's going on so far.
well, that's crazy, right? Because you have general population with a vulnerable population, and then, you know, you're in F dorm in the upper tier getting air conditioning, and then the K dorms, you're like, there's no difference between you and I. You're just out of luck.
Right. Yeah, I think it could cause all kinds of problems, right? And then the other thing I'm just thinking about, already the mental anguish that you kind of experience just being incarcerated and watching inhumane treatment of people that you grow to care about. I just
Mhm.
can't imagine how much more so that would be, for a population that really really can't do much about it, right? You're already, as being incarcerated, you already have such a little voice and such little capability to defend yourself or act on your behalf. But I just can't imagine being in a hospice situation and having to see that.
Oh, I can't either. I mean, one of my first memories at the unit at Lane Murray was standing outside a commissary, which is next to the laundry, next to the chow hall in that building. And, that was a debacle anyway. But I remember standing there and it was pouring rain. And you can't help the ladies in the wheelchairs. Don't touch them. Don't touch their wheelchair. And there's actually a little slope that the main street has. So these women are pushing as much as they can, and you just got to walk by them. And in the heat, they would be rolling as long as it took them to get there in the heat. And then this one lady was in the rain dropping stuff, whatever her little property was, and she had a cane and she fell trying to pick it up. And it's just like people are just walking, officers, staff, and there's this old lady with a cane laying on the ground and it's pouring rain and nobody, it's almost like she wasn't there. That's how people acted, like, oh well, like she's just not even there. And I will never forget that scene in my mind.
So that one scene, and that's the maybe the first one that comes to your mind, but I know that there are hundreds like it, because there are hundreds in my mind that same kind of scenario has happened. And it's definitely not a lack of compassion from other incarcerated ladies, because we want to help each other, but that's a disciplinary action, right? So it would be the kind of situation that if there wasn't any officer around, I would probably take the chance and be helping and just hope that the
Right.
person in line control, or, that somebody didn't come out and start yelling, or write me up, write a disciplinary case up. And those cases add up and they affect your freedom. They
Hmm.
affect your chances at parole. They affect if you can talk to your kids on the phone. They affect if you can hug them at visitation. And it's serious. So how do you go from, or how does the state expect for people to go from that, where we are just walking by someone that is in need, to now we're in our communities, and how are we supposed to treat our neighbors?
Right. When you've been trained to number one, self-preserve, I can't afford disciplinary, I can't do any of that. And some of it too, Marcy, was, not just watching how elderly and disabled people were treated and neglected, but also just seeing levels of violence or medical emergencies. The only way to cope with that inside is to dissociate and compartmentalize it and turn yourself off and not feel. And it's really hard. And I discovered that in my life journey. It's really hard to turn that back on. And you have to work really hard with a lot of therapy to turn that switch back on. And it's not, like you said, it's not for being evil or nasty or cruel hearted. It is, you cannot cope with those feelings. And there's a helplessness to it that there's nothing you can do. And you're just forced to bear witness to it and do nothing. So you just turn off. I mean, that was the only way I knew how to deal with it.
Very much so. I mean, those coping skills that we have to be able to deal with that trauma when it's active trauma, we're right in the middle of it. That's one thing that I just remember. We laughed a lot about things that were not really laughable moments. Like it's really not funny to be in the strip shack coming in from host squad and have to have all your feminine products off and out of your body, and you're on your cycle, and you're getting yelled at, and it's 20 people crammed in this small space, and it smells horrible. We've been outside working, and we would laugh and crack jokes about that kind of stuff, but it wasn't funny. We were just having to deal with it some way. And it was kind of one of those, what is that saying? You either have to laugh or cry kind of things.
Yeah, no, and I think all of us that know each other and spend time together in our group chats, our group texts, there is a lot of dark humor there. And I had somebody one time make a comment. I don't know if it was on my Facebook or something, that I had made a joke about, something that related to prison. I'd made a joke about it or whatever. And, she was like, well, I think the criminal justice system is, a serious matter. And I find so much that is not easy to laugh about. I said, well, ma'am, after 20 years, sometimes all you have is a sense of humor. That's all you have, that and dissociating. So, and those of us that have spent time inside, we know how valuable humor really is. It really, like, you look now and back on some of that stuff and it's like, man, that wasn't funny. Like, I still think it's funny, but at the same time, I know deep down it's not. But I didn't know how to survive any other way. And I want to show people this little area right here. That's the strip shack. Another horrible experience. If you've ever had to be stripped in and out at Lane Murray, it's this tiny little bitty room. And those host squad bosses stripping you in and out. I've never been so degraded as a woman in my entire life. Never had an experience except at hobby. And that's for another time. Well, I don't want to have to zoom through this, but we're getting close to our time. I'm just going to show everybody else that these buildings here that are in the shape of a T, I guess, across, what do you call that?
Well, yeah, kind of a short T.
Yeah. So these are the cell blocks, correct?
Yeah, those are both the cell block buildings. So the one that's directly across from the chapel and from F dorm, that's where closed custody is. That's for long-term solitary confinement. Yeah, that's that building. And that's the first time I ever knew that people could be housed in solitary confinement for years. And that's where they are. And then the next building is cell block housing. Medium custody housing is there.
And then these three are the K dorms. So these are dormitories, correct?
Right. Then there's 3 more dorms. So there's 6 dorms, 6 buildings that house inmates on that unit. And the 3 that look just alike, those are the K dorms. And there's 204 women in each of those dorms. So two pods in each dorm.
So let me go to the next. That's the outside perimeter fence. I remember sticking my hands inside of there to pull those weeds and pulling back bloody nubs. Yeah, so these women here, they're either on the yard or on probably the host squad cleaning around the perimeter fence.
Yeah,
And
that's
you'll
for
see,
sure. That
yeah,
razor wire, golly. I mean, I don't know how many times people's heads, because you have to, those, you see, there's ladies that, some ladies are holding an Aggie, and the Aggie is shoved in this ringed razor wired bunch that's on the ground around the unit, so that people maybe don't shimmy under the fence. And so there are a few women that are holding the fence, the razor wire up. The other women are all on their knees underneath that razor
mhm.
wire that the Aggies are perilously holding up, so that weeds can get pulled. And that's what's happening. They're on their it's not a safe place. And I cannot believe
Mm-mm.
no one's I can't believe no one's been hospitalized, or no one that I know of, not to say no one. No one that I know of has been hospitalized for this. It's so dangerous. And those Aggies slip.
Yeah.
They slip. So
It
people,
and Marcy, I want people to know that that razor wire, I mean, it is like I it really is the sharpest, like, thinnest, I mean, just barely bump up against it, and it is slice and dice, like, unbelievable. Like when I hear about people crawling over these razor wires, like during escapes and stuff, like they're saying, oh, they barely live, they had to get them down. They are bleeding to death. Like that razor wire is not a joke. Um, Let me go to the next
yeah,
picture. Oops, I'm
yeah,
sorry.
it's blades. It's blades. So this is the chapel.
Wow,
This
I
is
want
the
everybody that can see this, take a look at how nice the stage is, the little mural in the background, and the ladies in their chairs. It seems like oh, okay. The chapel is not indicative of the rest of the unit.
No, it's not. No, it's definitely not. What's funny about that chapel is the chaplain's office, um, has her office is right next to easily the most terrific officers on the unit, which
Oh
would
yeah,
be
the
the
safe
safe
prisons are.
prisons officers. And it's just, it's just shocking that the chaplain has to hear them all the time. It's yeah.
Marcy, we have to do a whole episode on safe prisons.
Oh yeah, for sure. For
On
sure.
what the intent of the Prison Rape Elimination Act and safe prisons is. I taught it for many years, but what does that look like on a women's unit? Y'all have to stay tuned for that, because it's the most dreadful part about being incarcerated as a woman in TDCJ. Now, I got this picture. I think it's from a men's unit, but this reminded me a lot of F dorm.
Right, that is definitely the cubicle style housing. So, the way that half of the dorms on that unit are is, instead of a cell, it's a cubicle. If you can imagine, if you're not seeing the picture, if you can imagine an office cubicle that's half size, and basically in each cubicle is just room for your small bunk, and then that same amount of walking space as your bunk took up. So it's very small. There's storage underneath our bunk. It's a metal box that's, welded onto the bottom of our metal bunk, and that's where we have to store all of our stuff. Um, and I have to say, I didn't I mean, as far as prison goes, it at least I felt like I had my own space. It wasn't bunk beds in an open dorm, or, and Veronica has a great point. She says it's just enough room to do a push-up. That's exactly how much walking space you have in that cubicle. And I can do a full workout in that amount of space. It's really amazing what we can adapt to as humans. So
I found this picture, and this is at a men's unit during COVID, and I'm looking at all the stuff on the table, and
Mm-mm.
I can feel myself there again. Like I almost feel a little bit of panic because it's like I remember that insert cup. I remember sitting that on the corner in my being in my jacket when it was cold and that hot pot there and like I can just feel it all because that is exactly um what that space looks like.
You know that that's exactly right. We're looking at and there is an inmate. We can't see his face, and this picture was publicly posted online, but it's an inmate, and he is sleeping in his jacket because the temperatures control in there is nothing, right? We are whatever it is outside, that's how those warehouse like buildings feel. Whatever the temperature is outside, that's pretty close to how it feels.
It's a Veronica says, "Yeah, I'm looking at this and I have weird feelings of comfort yet no comfort at all." I mean, you said it best. Like, right? Like I feel the comfort of like especially when me and Alexa had the flu, like being nestled up there and all my stuff right there at the table and not being
Mhm.
bothered and like you said having my own at least this own little tiny space, but it feels comforting but at the same time I have no comfort at all in the way that it makes me feel just looking at it now. It's yeah. Um, let me show the last. I think this is the last. So this picture isn't as great, but I wanted to make sure that I showed a picture of essentially what ADSEG in cell block close custody um, ADSEG looks like, and this is pretty accurate, like down to the mattress, the metal toilet, the torn up paint on the wall, the table. Um,
What I still love, and I just can't help but notice any publicly posted picture of the inside of the prison, even as dreary as these walls look, when you go in, they are full of graffiti, desperate cries for help, prayers written on the wall, religious figures drawn on the wall, and so it TDCJ never shows that, right?
right.
Um, and it's clean. It doesn't look clean because you see the rusted paint and you see, but I can tell right now when anytime I've been in AdSeg, which has been at least minimally 6 that I've spent the night there. I've been in those cells a lot more than that. But the toilet would be completely horribly on the inside. So and there is somebody saying, and I share this space with another person. So this is also the same size and the same setup as a 2-man cell on Lane Murray. It would just be bunk beds instead.
Right.
So, yeah, definitely a 2-man cell in cell block housing. They are housed together, but this is what we're looking at now without the bunk bed. This is a solitary confinement cell. Um, that
And
mattress is a pretty good portrayal of our mattresses. Also, I'm kind of impressed that they even put that online, frankly, because
I think it
it
was a
just irks
contraband
me.
picture. I
Do you
think
know and it might be a contraband picture because
yeah.
every picture that I see, they have pillows. It makes
Yeah.
me so angry. We didn't have pillows, and they don't have pillows now,
Right.
but they want the public to think that they have a pillow to sleep on. No, they sleep on that mat.
Yeah, and flip that mat over and it's liable to be gutted and ripped at the bottom of it. And when that happens, there's no telling what's inside of it, including bugs. It literally is third world country type of conditions, and we're talking about the state of Texas.
Well,
And
just recently, we got denied extradition because of our prison conditions. We wanted someone that was wanted in the state of Texas, and they were out of country, and that country said, sorry, you don't meet the standards for that.
Right. We're
And this
not,
is
we're,
not, well, we're not going to some third world country. This is the United States that this is happening to, and people are not sending people over to in our prisons. That's what kind of horrible conditions they are. And so Big Cinco is on here, and I'm not sure. Maybe he's incarcerated now. But
I feel
if
like that's what he's trying to say.
yeah, he said most mats have black mold on the bottom.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an ugly situation for sure.
Well, Marcy, we are at
We sure
8:01.
are. We sure are.
We took the
Trip
whole
down
tour.
memory Main Street at Lane Murray.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to compare this to other units. So we'll have to find somebody at each unit. I mean, I can talk about Mountain View, but it would be interesting. Even though I've been at Crane, it's still really great to hear other people's perspectives. So, y'all that are watching and listening, if you would like to be on here with me and Marcy and tell us about the unit that you did time at, Plain State, that's another bad one. We would like to hear it. Lockhart, that's certainly a different experience. So,
It sure is. It sure
I,
is.
I
Veronica was on Hobby. My girlfriend was on Hobby. Yeah, we definitely need to do that, but we have lots of things to talk about, right? This is just the beginning. So
Yeah,
thank
this is
y'all.
just the beginning.
Thank
And
y'all for
remember,
tuning in.
y'all, it is eventually we're going to just be streaming to our channel. We're trying to get everybody used to us being live on Wednesday, but we're going to be on the Rec Yard, a women's prison podcast. I'm trying to, I should have put it in the chat already, or at least highlighted it. Talk, Marcy, while I pull it up.
Well, yeah, definitely. And you guys, if wherever you're watching now, I promise that we'll have a link to that. So I think even on our YouTube channels, on our personal YouTube channels, there's a spot for us to say shared channel or channels. I saw that today, and I'll make sure that we connect all of that. And thank you. It's at On the Rec Yard.
Okay, so that's the handle on YouTube. All right,
On
because
the Rec Yard. And I think we're just starting, like it just went live just moments ago, pretty much.
just moments.
And we need subscribers for sure. So yes,
Yes.
and my old bunkie from K2 is on here too. But so thank y'all for joining. We have to get off here because we hit our limit. But it was so good to see everybody. Thanks for the comments and the great feedback. And yeah, Jennifer, thanks. Tunchi, I'll see you soon.
Next Wednesday, y'all.
Bye, y'all.
See you at Rec. Bye.